I wish for you with all my heart that your writings will contain only happy and lucky events. Your loving father, Vienna, April 19, 1939.
Nearly 82 years ago, Liesl Schick's father handed her this diary as he placed her and her young brother on the Kinder transport to escape Austria when the Nazis moved in. This picture, taken just before Liesl and her brother were separated from their parents. An 11-year-old little girl tasked with caring for her brother and surviving.
In this picture, you're smiling.
Yeah.
But I have to imagine it was one of the scariest times of your life.
It was not the happiest time.
Liesl remembers the moment she realized times were changing.
In March 1938, Hitler overran Austria.
She was just a young schoolgirl.
I went into my classroom and I saw the crucifix is gone. And in its place is a huge portrait of Hitler. And you were supposed to go and salute it.
She didn't. And that's when Liesl first experienced what life was like as a Jew.
They said, no, we were not in a fight, but you're a dirty Jew. And we want nothing to do with you.
She was bullied, to say the least.
I looked at my dad and I said, Daddy, can't you do something? And my dad shook his head and he said, there's nothing I can do.
Except get her out. Liesl and her brother lived in Great Britain until her father was able to meet them. They moved to New York, where Liesl's mother was waiting, all four fortunate enough to escape, while their other family members died in the Holocaust. But Liesl vowed to take her story and use it for good.
Like, I never forget that the kid said to me, you're a dirty Jew. That's a long, long time ago. I'll never forget it.
Once bullied for who she is in perhaps the world's greatest tragedy, Liesl shares her story to young school children.
And I plead with them not to bully.
Encouraging them to always show kindness, even when it feels impossible.
She said to me, but you've changed my life. So that's something I won't forget.
That is what makes Liesl Schick a remarkable woman.
What a story, my goodness gracious. And furthermore than that, she's also providing schools across the country with these trunks that have Holocaust curriculum for teachers who can't afford to get their own curriculum. So she sends these trunks off so more and more children can learn about what she went through.
The trunk program is this teacher on assignment used to carry all these books and papers back and forth to the museum and to the schools. And we said to him, there's got to be an easier way. Why don't you put it in a suitcase or something? And so that was the humble beginnings of our teaching trunk program. Those teaching trunks, they get shipped out not only in our local area, but all across Florida and even throughout the continental United States. There is no charge for these teaching trunks. And inside them, a middle school, high school trunk weighs about 140 pounds. And inside of them are books, educational materials, posters, maps, videos. And the beauty of these trunks is that even if a teacher has never taught the Holocaust, there's a teacher guide in there that was written by teachers in order to assist them to use that trunk to get the most out of the trunk. You know, in those trunks, in the middle school trunk, there are 30 copies of Anne Frank, and in the high school trunk, there are 30 copies of Night. And the reason for that is so that every student in the classroom has their own copy that they can work from.
The trunks, of course, I'm telling you. Whenever the trunks came to our school, it was almost like a celebration. We had like a party. The thing that I loved about the trunk was that we got resources that we normally would not have gotten in the school system. And so one thing I really loved about it was that there was something for every student. So if the students who liked art, there was something for that student. If they liked reading, there was something for that student. But overall, the trunk was my first and my last experience because it helped the students the most.
The Holocaust is something that all teachers need to be teaching their students. It's something that everyone needs to learn, regardless of how they feel about it. It's something that impacts your life, whether you realize it or not, because it was a huge, huge aspect of history that really just changed the way that everything worked. It split up countries. It killed millions of people. It touched religions. It just makes everyone think about how it was a horrible aspect, but it's something that everyone needs to be educated in on.
This here is what the Dutch people had to carry on them at all times. They called that an Ausweis. All Dutch people had to come, all of them, regardless whatever you were, to be registered, and you had to be fingerprinted. You didn't do anything wrong, but you were fingerprinted, and your name, your address, and everything was on it. And on the reverse side, you had to bring a picture, a passport picture, and that was put on there. And then all Jews received, as you can see on the right and left corner, a J on it. That means, of course, that if you were stopped on the street by the Nazis, Gestapo, that you had to produce this ID, then they could see that you were a Jew, so you were taken away. Everybody had to wear this on that person at all times. In the middle, that stamp that you see there, like I told before in my in the video here, that I was working in a hospital, and for not to go or be exempt actually temporarily from the concentration camp. And this stamp was put on there, which says, "Ich habe dieses Ausweises bis auf weiteres vom Arbeitseinsatz freigestellt," which means that temporarily you were exempt, that you didn't have to go to these camps. And as you see, there is the stamp on it there from the SD, which is the German police. That is the round stamp that you see there. There is also the swastika on it, and it was stamped by the SD, which is the Sicherheitsdienst. There's marked on it the Bevelhaber der Sicherheitspolizei in The Hague. And I was fortunate to have that till further notice, and then of course then it was not worth anything anymore. But for a while it kept me out of the camps.
Holocaust Museum would be something that we can really use in Florida. Florida is not the friendliest state as far as minorities are concerned. And I got the idea of maybe getting a boxcar.
You know, it's interesting, when they brought the boxcar here, they wanted me to speak and tell my story, what happened there. And I told them, you must be kidding. From all what I have gone through, I should remember what happened in the car. And they said, yes, remember, tomorrow, we'll ask you tomorrow. And sure enough, I came home and I was thinking, what happened? How did it was horrible. People were standing. There was no room to sit down. But when I came when I walked in, I saw in a corner my two friends sitting down there, so I ran to them. And this was unusual that she could sit down, so she found a corner and sat down. And it was horrible conditions.
The arrival of the boxcar was a very, very dramatic, very touching event. Walter Lobenberg had hired somebody to find a boxcar that hadn't been repainted and hadn't been refurbished, that was in original state. And he found someone who said, yes, I could do that. And 9 months, a year later, he calls up and said, guess what? The boxcar is going to be arriving in the port of Tampa. And a bunch of us came down there with a large truck, and this remarkable boxcar was lifted off the ship and placed on the truck. And it was transported to the original museum location, which was on Dumie Road in Madeira Beach. And it was just the most remarkable moment for all of us. And it was the foundation for what was to become the Florida Holocaust Museum, which is one of the best Holocaust museums in the United States.
So do you remember that we brought the boxcar from Madeira Beach in a parade down Central Avenue? Right. And we had had lots of publicity on it, so there must have been hundreds of people. And we only went like maybe 2 blocks. But my daughter was 6, I think, at the time, and she was in the parade, and we had lots of kids in the parade, and it was just phenomenal. And we got cheers, and it was really a significant, meaningful experience.
When that boxcar was brought to this new museum, it was put into their parking lot. And they didn't want to leave it alone. It was going to be put into the museum the next day. We had an all-night vigil, and I was one of those who stayed with it. We had yachtside candles all around it, and it was very emotional and very touching to be there, and it was wonderful.
Recognized a Holocaust survivor as Tampa Bay's Remarkable Woman in 2021.
And now a special exhibit has opened at the Florida Holocaust Museum that shares her incredible story of hope and kindness. News Channel 8's Justin Shecker spoke with Liesl Schick again tonight, and he is joining us live in the Tampa newsroom.
Keith and Jen, good evening to you both. When News Channel 8 honored Liesl Schick about a year ago, she donated the $1,000 she received to the local museum with the mission to make sure we never forget.
As I grew older and older, I couldn't believe that my parents had the nerve to put us on that train.
Liesl Schick was just 11 years old when she and her younger brother escaped Nazi-occupied Austria in 1938 on the Kindertransport.
I kept saying to him, don't worry and don't cry. because I'm going to take care of you.
The Kinder Transport was a rescue effort that saved about 10,000 mostly Jewish children by allowing them to reside in Great Britain during World War II.
And what's unbelievably fortunate but sad is that my mother was one of 1,000 children who was able to see her parents again.
Nancy Greenberg volunteers at the Florida Holocaust Museum, where there's now a special exhibit that tells her mother's story.
I felt it was very important to not forget.
The display features personal artifacts like a handkerchief Schick's mother gave her before boarding the train to London.
And the embroidery was done by my mother. And so there are either one or two handkerchiefs to remind us of her.
For Greenberg, her mother has always been an inspiration.
My mother's my role model and my best friend, and I thank God every day I was given the parents that I had, and it wouldn't have happened if not for the kindness of strangers.
And you can see the special exhibit on Liesl Schick's remarkable story by visiting the third floor of the Florida Holocaust Museum in St. Pete between now and June. Live in the Tampa News Center, I'm Justin Shecker, 8 on your side.
So this is called Shoes of My Donnic. Shoes of my Donnic whisper yet, with broken souls and wizened tongues. Never forget. Don't ever forget the neighborhoods where once we met with loved ones in the morning sun. Shoes of my Donnic whisper yet, from brick and mounds still flecked with dirt. Sabbath shoes, Sunday shoes, school day shoes, flung off kickball, love me shoes. Never forget the buckles, ties, the shoes, the wretched shoes despised. The dried up scraps among the treads on which the shoes of Madonic fled. And shapes of feet, the curves of flesh, cushioned toes, and well-cupped heels still clung as if they'd never forget the ones who laced them by their beds and trusted them to run. Shoes of Madonic whisper yet, never forget, don't ever forget.
Kristallnacht, then my sister was already gone. I was going to the bakery every morning with my bicycle at 6 o'clock in the morning. And when the day of Kristallnacht, I went to work at 6 o'clock in the morning. And there were things going on the street, but I wouldn't know what they were. You know, there were trucks running around. 6 o'clock in the morning. I remember usually there was nobody on the street yet. And there was excitement going on. You could see things happening, but you didn't see anything. I thought nothing of it. I went to work like I always do. Got to the place that I worked, and there was nobody there. The place was totally destroyed. I mean, they had smashed every dish, and it was just a mess. I looked around for a little bit. There was nobody there. There was a synagogue, a Reformed synagogue, about 2 or 3 doors down, very large synagogue. Nothing had happened there when I was there. And so after a little while, I said, well, I better go back home. On my way home, I had to pass a conservative synagogue in which I was by mitzvah. And there were some people standing there. And they had a photographer standing there, and I have never forgotten this because he was there with his hood over his head taking pictures. Smoke was coming out of the synagogue, and it was on fire. There were about 50 people there. That picture that I had always in my mind is in the archives. The Anne Frank exhibit has that picture in it. Other magazines, documentation has the picture in it that I was actually there seeing the people. I stopped for a little while, and at that time I still didn't know what was really happening. It was probably 6:30 in the morning, and I went home. When I got home, my father was very sick, and I don't remember what he had. He had bad flu or whatever, but he could barely stand up. He was in bed, very sick. In comes DSS, and they want to arrest him. They get him out of bed, he collapsed. Okay. Well, they tried to move him, they couldn't move him, and he went back to bed. An hour later, they come back, they try to move him again, smashed a few dishes and stuff in our house, and they could not move him, so they took me. I was then 14 years old, so they took me. They took me on a truck with a bunch of other people, and I ended up in a assembly hall, which was a exhibition hall. When I got there, a lot of people in there, and they grouped us into groups of about 100, 3-4 deep, and across, and we stood there. It must have been around 8 o'clock in the morning by the time I got there, 8:30, whatever it was. We stood there all day long. People were falling, couldn't get up after a while. No water, no food, no nothing. And it was that night, 7, 8 o'clock, I don't know the time, when suddenly you could hear things moving, and the groups of people were moving out of the hall, one group at a time. As they came closer to move our group, some SS man looked at me and he says, "How old are you?" I said, 14, but I had a beard already, dark beard, so I looked older. He says, "You're only 14? I said, "Yes." He said, "Stand over there." And I moved over there. And pretty soon there were about 8-10 people standing with me. And every group moved out of the hall, and we were the only 10 people left. We then had to sweep the place down, clean it up. And when we were done, they took us out the door. When we got close to the door, we were surrounded by SS in a very tight circle. I didn't know at that time what it was. Then marched us out the door, and there were hundreds of people out there, screaming, mostly women. The women were the most fanatic and much worse than the men in viciousness. So they pushed us through that group and protected us from getting beat up. They wanted to tear us apart. And when we got to the end of the walkway, like all these exhibition halls have a large open area where people can come in. When we got up to the street, by that time it was 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And I don't know how long these people had been standing out there, but they were bent to destroy us. And when we got to the edge to the street, the SS jumped aside and left us alone. Well, I was 14 years old. I could run pretty good. I was in good shape. And I ran towards an area where I know I had relatives living not too far apart. I ran, but people kept getting closer. I could hear them hollering in the background, and it sounded louder. After some time, I couldn't run anymore. So in Europe, the telephone booth have a bottom closer. It's glass on top, and if you've ever seen the old ones, the bottom is solid, about a foot high. So I ran in the telephone booth and laid down, and a group of women ran by and screaming and howling. So luckily they didn't find me. After the noise died down, I got up and proceeded towards my uncle's house. Well, by that time, everybody knew what was going on, and he wouldn't open the door for me. He was scared. So I finally convinced him to call our house and tell him I was okay. And I walked home from there. I mean, it's a long walk. We were a long way. But things were fairly quiet by then. And I went home. The next day, naturally, we knew more of what went on because all the stores were destroyed, all the, and the Jewish community was really in an uproar. And it was a very trying time at the time because nobody knew what to do. I have a letter that my mother wrote that day. And she really didn't say anything. She said, "We gotta go." And then we worked on leaving the country.